Partition of 1947. The year was 1947. After nearly 2 centuries of British colonial rule, the Indian subcontinent was finally on the path to independence. But freedom came with a catch: the land would not remain united. The British Raj, one of the largest empires in human history, was to be split into 2 sovereign nations, India and Pakistan. The partition was not merely a political boundary. It was a division along religious lines. Hindus and Sikhs largely formed the majority in India, while Pakistan was envisioned as a homeland for the Muslims of the subcontinent. Muhammad Ali Jinnah, the leader of the Muslim League, argued that Muslims required their own state to protect their identity, culture, and political rights. The plan was rushed. Boundaries were hastily drawn by British lawyer Cyril Radcliffe, a man who had never visited India before. With only a few weeks to decide the fate of millions, he carved out the borders that created West Pakistan, today's Pakistan, and East Pakistan, today's Bangladesh. But the consequences of partition were catastrophic. Nearly 15 million people were uprooted from their homes, making it one of the largest forced migrations in history. Trains filled with refugees crossed the borders, but many never reached their destination. Villages were burned, families torn apart, and an estimated 1 to 2 million people lost their lives in communal violence. For Pakistan, independence meant hope and a new beginning, but it also meant struggle. The new nation lacked infrastructure, resources, and even a stable administrative system. India, meanwhile, inherited most of the British colonial institutions, but also faced the challenge of integrating hundreds of princely states into the Union, and among these princely states lay the seat of future conflict, Jammu and Kashmir. At the time of partition, princely states were given a choice: join India, join Pakistan, or remain independent. Most states made their decision based on geography and demographics. But Kashmir was different. Kashmir was a Muslim-majority region ruled by a Hindu king, Maharaja Hari Singh. Geographically, it was connected to both India and Pakistan. Pakistan believed Kashmir should naturally join them due to its Muslim population and its strategic position. India, on the other hand, hoped the Maharaja would choose to accede to the Indian Union. For weeks, the Maharaja hesitated, hoping to remain independent. But in October 1947, tribal militias from Pakistan's side entered Kashmir, allegedly supported by elements within Pakistan's military. Faced with invasion, the Maharaja turned to India for help. India agreed to send troops, but only after the Maharaja signed the Instrument of Accession, formally joining Kashmir to India. This marked the beginning of the First Indo-Pak War 1947 to 1948. The First War, 1947-1948. The first war between India and Pakistan was fought largely in the mountainous terrain of Jammu and Kashmir. On one side were Indian forces, supported by the Maharaja's troops. On the other were tribal militias and eventually regular Pakistani soldiers. The fighting was brutal. Villages were destroyed, and thousands of civilians were displaced in the crossfire. The war dragged on for over a year, and by the time it ended, neither side had achieved a decisive victory. In January 1948, India took the matter to the newly formed United Nations, seeking international intervention. The UN called for an immediate ceasefire and proposed a plebiscite, a vote by the Kashmiri people to decide whether to join India or Pakistan. But the plebiscite never took place. By the time the ceasefire was declared in 1949, Kashmir was divided by what became known as the Line of Control Lock. Pakistan controlled roughly 1/3 of the territory, while India retained 2/3, including the Kashmir Valley, Jammu, and Ladakh. This division of Kashmir, unresolved and bitterly contested, laid the foundation for decades of hostility. The Second War, 1965. Nearly 2 decades later, tensions flared again. The Second Indo-Pak War broke out in 1965, once again over Kashmir. Pakistan launched Operation Gibraltar, a plan to infiltrate forces into Indian-controlled Kashmir and incite rebellion. But the plan backfired. Instead of rising up, the local population largely reported the infiltrators to Indian forces. India retaliated with full military strength, crossing the international border into Pakistan's Punjab region. The conflict escalated rapidly, turning into a full-scale war. For 17 days, the two nations fought fierce battles on land and in the air. It was one of the largest tank battles since World War I, particularly at the Battle of Chawinda. Both sides claimed victory, but in reality, the war ended in a stalemate. The United Nations intervened again, calling for a ceasefire. The Tashkent Agreement, brokered by the Soviet Union, brought the war to an end. But Kashmir remained unresolved, and the rivalry only deepened. The Third War, 1971 if 1947 and 1965 War wars over Kashmir, The 1971 war was about something else entirely, the fate of East Pakistan. Since partition, Pakistan had been split into two wings, West Pakistan and East Pakistan, separated by over 1,000 miles of Indian territory. Despite East Pakistan's larger population, political power remained concentrated in the West. Economic inequality, political neglect, and cultural suppression fueled resentment in the East. In 1971, after a contested election, tensions boiled over. The Pakistan military launched Operation Searchlight to crush the Bengali independence movement. The result was a humanitarian disaster. Millions of refugees fled to India, and reports of atrocities shocked the world. India, under Prime Minister Indira Gandhi, decided to intervene. In December 1971, India launched a military campaign in support of Bengali rebels. Within 2 weeks, Pakistani forces in the east surrendered. East Pakistan was reborn as the independent nation of Bangladesh. The 1971 war was a decisive victory for India and a devastating loss for Pakistan. It reshaped South Asia and deepened the animosity between the two nations. Legacy of the early wars from 1947 to Kargil, each conflict left scars that never fully healed. For Pakistan, the wars reinforced its sense of vulnerability against a much larger neighbor. For India, they confirmed the belief that Pakistan would continue to challenge its sovereignty over Kashmir. The wars also shaped the military doctrines of both nations. Pakistan turned to alliances with the United States and China, while India deepened ties with the Soviet Union. Both nations invested heavily in their armed forces, eventually acquiring nuclear weapons in the late 20th century. And so, the shadow of 1947 continues to loom large. Partition was not just the birth of two nations, it was the birth of a rivalry that still defines South Asia today. Closing narration for section. The partition of 1947 created two nations. But it also created a question that remains unanswered: who does Kashmir belong to? The first wars between India and Pakistan were not just about land, they were about identity, survival, and destiny. And even decades later, the echoes of those wars still reverberate. To understand what might happen if Pakistan and India went to war today, we must carry this history with us, because history, more often than not, shapes the future.